What if the multi-headed dragons and, these apocalyptic beasts in the Book of Revelation aren't just vague metaphors for human struggle?
Right.
What if they are actually a highly specific, perfectly coded blueprint of 20th century geopolitics in the Far East?
It's a massive shift in perspective.
It really is. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're asking you to consider a premise that just completely upends how we typically read ancient prophecy. Because, usually you look at a multi-headed dragon in an apocalyptic text, and the expectation is just absolute abstraction.
Yeah, it's treated almost like modern art.
Exactly. Like a general warning about evil that stays, safely in the distant past, or some ethereal, totally undefined future.
But the document we're looking at today, it removes that comforting ambiguity entirely.
Yeah, it really does.
We're examining this incredibly detailed piece of historical exegesis,
Yeah.
an interpretive document, basically. It's written by an author operating under the pseudonym Bright Morning Star.
Yeah.
And what this author does is take chapters 12 and 13 of Revelation and meticulously correlate those ancient symbols directly to the rise of the Soviet Union, the Chinese Communist Party, and the North Korean Kim Dynasty.
It's wild. It treats the biblical text like a high-definition X-ray of modern history.
That's a great way to put it.
And our mission today is to really pull apart this fascinating historical puzzle. We're going to examine exactly how the author connects these ancient cryptic verses to the literal mechanics of modern warfare, espionage, and statecraft.
Yeah, it gets incredibly specific.
It does. But before we get into the weeds, we do need to offer a crucial disclaimer. We want to make it absolutely clear to you, the listener, that we are taking a strictly impartial look at this document.
Right. Very important to state.
Yeah, we aren't here to validate its theological claims, and we're definitely not taking any political sides regarding the left-wing or right-wing histories we're about to discuss.
Exactly.
Our goal is simply to guide you through this astonishing, intricate pattern recognition that the author has laid out.
Yeah, we're really just looking at the architecture of the argument. And the brilliance of this document is how it anchors the sequence of biblical events to a very specific chronological timeline.
Okay.
So if we want to understand the main monsters that dominate Revelation chapter 13, the author argues we first have to understand who is pulling the strings back in chapter 12.
Right. It begins with the transfer of power.
Exactly.
So chapter 12 introduces this figure known as the Red Dragon. And, traditionally in biblical scholarship, this represents Satan or just a generalized oppressive spiritual force.
Right.
But Bright Morning Star identifies this dragon specifically as the Chinese Soviet Republic, basically the early precursor to the CCP, which was established in the city of Ruzhin back in 1931.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the emergence of what the text calls the sea beast in chapter 13.
Okay, the sea beast.
Yeah. Revelation describes this terrifying creature with 7 heads and 10 horns rising from the sea. Now, in ancient Near Eastern literary tradition, the sea usually represents the secular, chaotic world.
Like a turbulent space devoid of divine order.
Precisely. And the author aligns this sea beast directly with the Soviet Union.
Wow.
And the text contains this very specific mechanical detail. It says the dragon gave its power and seat to the sea beast.
And historically, that dynamic is completely accurate. In the early 1930s, the Chinese Soviet Republic, the dragon in this framework, was incredibly weak.
Oh, absolutely.
It was essentially a fledgling rural insurgency. To survive, it was entirely dependent on the Soviet Union and the Comintern.
Right.
And for those who might not be familiar, the Comintern was the Communist International, which functioned essentially as Moscow's global franchise headquarters for exporting revolution.
Yeah, and the author details this dependency at a really granular level. The Soviet Union wasn't just a friendly neighbor sending occasional aid.
No, not at all.
It was the total lifeblood of the early Chinese Communist movement. You look at the military command structure, it was literally handed over to Comintern advisors.
Men like Otto Braun, right.
Exactly. Men who literally dictated tactical maneuvers. Then, a bit later, you have the famous 156 key projects.
Oh, right.
The Soviets didn't just give China money. They sent thousands of engineers and drafted the blueprints to build China's modern heavy industry, their energy grid, their military sectors, all completely from scratch.
It was just a total imitation of Soviet models. Like, they copied everything from central planned economies and government hierarchies right down to the curriculum in universities.
Yeah, organizing them into highly specialized engineering schools, just like Moscow did.
It's almost like, if you think of it like a business, The USSR was this massive, ruthless corporate conglomerate, the Sea Beast.
Okay, I like that.
And they acted as the heavily resourced muscle and the bank for a brand new, struggling startup franchise, which is the Dragon. Like, the USSR was the operating system, and early communist China was just the hardware. Every piece of software, from military doctrine to the local tax code, was entirely written and installed by Moscow.
That analogy hits the nail on the head, really, because it highlights the sheer scale of the Soviet Union's influence.
Yeah.
But to achieve true global dominance, to
Yeah.
really capture the awe of the entire world, this sea beast couldn't just rely on bureaucratic power or industrial export.
Right. It needed something bigger.
According to the apocalyptic text, it needed to perform a miracle.
Yeah.
And this leads us to the author's interpretation of a very famous biblical verse, the beast's fatal wound that heals.
Ah, okay.
Right.
Because Revelation 13 says one of the beast's heads suffered a fatal wound but was miraculously healed, and as a result, the whole world marveled and followed it.
Exactly.
Bright Morning Star correlates this directly to the USSR's experience in World War II, specifically the German invasion known as Operation Barbarossa. And when you look at the historical facts laid out in the source, I mean, it's hard to argue with the phrasing fatal wound. The numbers are just devastating.
They really are. The demographic collapse of the Soviet Union during World War II it's almost impossible to fully comprehend.
Yeah.
They suffered roughly 27 million dead.
27 million.
And to put a finer point on that destruction, over 80% of all Soviet men born in the year 1923 were wiped out by the end of the war.
Wow. 80%. That's a lost generation.
Completely. You had 3.3 million prisoners of war who starved or froze to death in camps. Entire cities were reduced to rubble.
The agricultural base was scorched?
Exactly. The country was physically, economically, and demographically gutted. By every logical geopolitical metric, the nation should have collapsed inward.
But then we see the resurrection.
Right.
Against all odds, the USSR doesn't just survive. It bounces back almost instantaneously to become one of two global superpowers.
Yeah, they leveraged the Yalta system to absorb Eastern Europe into their sphere of influence.
And they physically dismantle industrial equipment from occupied territories, like literally packing up entire factories in East Germany and Manchuria.
Loading them onto trains and moving them east into Soviet territory to rebuild their own infrastructure.
And then by 1949, just 4 years after total devastation, they successfully detonate an atomic bomb.
It's mind-blowing. And the author provides this really fascinating psychological analysis of why this specific fake resurrection fooled so many millions of people around the globe.
Okay, why did it?
Well, the USSR's miraculous recovery provided a tangible historical narrative that seemed to prove their ideology was invincible.
Ah, I see.
It offered the promise of a concrete, earthly utopia. It essentially told humanity that paradise could be built through human engineering and state power.
Completely removing the concept of divine judgment or spiritual salvation.
Exactly. And for a traumatized post-war world, that is the perfect, irresistible bait.
I mean, I totally understand how effective that propaganda would be, but, and maybe you can help me out here, I'm stuck on a thematic point.
Okay, what is it?
Why would an ancient, supposedly sacred text care so much about the industrial and military bounce back of a fiercely secular atheist nation?
Right.
Like, it just seems completely out of place for a religious prophecy to focus on Soviet tank production and geopolitical maneuvering, you know?
It's a really valid friction point.
Yeah.
But the author resolves it by connecting this text to the broader theological framework found in Old Testament books like Daniel and Hosea.
Oh, okay.
In those texts, God frequently uses these massive beasts, these brutal secular empires, as unwitting tools.
Unwitting tools.
Yeah, they're described as instruments used to discipline a backsliding, corrupt world or to test a compromised religious establishment.
Ah, I see.
So the scripture cares about the geopolitical rise of this sea beast because, in this theological view, the beast is an involuntary actor executing a divine historical drama.
That makes a lot of sense. So once this sea beast has achieved this miraculous superpower status and captured the world's awe, how does it functionally wield that ultimate authority?
Well, according to the exegesis, it uses that power to systematically erase the very concept of the divine from public life.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, Revelation explicitly states that the beast is given a mouth to speak blasphemies for a period of 42 months.
42 months.
Right. Now, in biblical prophecy, 42 months, or 3.5 years, is a widely recognized coded time frame.
What does it mean?
It represents a limited, intensely focused period of suffering and divine permission for evil to run rampant.
Okay.
And the author maps this 42-month period of intense blasphemy precisely to Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev's aggressive anti-religious campaign.
Which peaked between 1958 and 1964.
Exactly.
See, I'm struggling with the historical timeline here a bit. Because Khrushchev is known in the West for the thaw, right?
Right.
I mean, he gave the secret speech in 1956 denouncing Stalin's crimes, he emptied out a lot of the gulags, and he generally de-Stalinized the country.
He did.
So it feels completely counterintuitive that his era, which was politically more relaxed, would be identified as the absolute peak of religious persecution.
It really does seem like a paradox, but the source explains the internal logic perfectly.
Okay.
Khrushchev did loosen political restrictions, but ideologically he was a communist purist.
Ah.
During World War II, Stalin had actually taken a highly pragmatic approach to religion.
Because he needed them to fight.
Exactly. Stalin reopened thousands of Russian Orthodox churches and allowed priests to minister to the people because he desperately needed to boost national morale to fight off the German invasion.
Right.
But Khrushchev viewed that pragmatic tolerance as a massive betrayal of pure original Leninism.
Wow. So he wanted to course correct.
Precisely. So, while Khrushchev made the Soviet Union politically freer in terms of speech religiously, he launched the most draconian, systematic eradication campaign since the Bolshevik Revolution.
And the specific mechanics of how he did it are just brutal. I mean, this wasn't just ideological rhetoric. It was an administrative stranglehold.
Yeah.
In just a few years, his administration closed over half the open churches in the entire country, dropping the number from around 22,000 to under 8,000.
It's staggering.
And they systematically shut down seminaries so that the older generation of priests couldn't even train replacements.
Right. And then in 1964, the state mandated that a course titled Scientific Atheism had to be a required subject at universities.
Wow.
If you refused to take it or if you didn't pass it, you simply did not graduate. Your professional life was over before it began.
But the text points out an even more chilling mechanism, the weaponization of the family unit.
Oh, this part is dark.
It really is.
Yeah.
Imagine you're a parent in 1960s Russia. The state introduced policies where if you simply sat at your kitchen table and taught your child the Lord's Prayer, or told them a biblical story,
Yeah.
the local authorities could legally declare you an unfit parent. They would strip you of custody, take your child away, and place them in a state-run orphanage for mandatory ideological re-education.
It's terrifying.
And this 42 months of blasphemy didn't just stay within Soviet borders. The source tracks extreme copycat movements across the sea beast's sphere of influence.
Right, like Albania.
Yes. Albania, heavily influenced by this Marxist-Leninist purity, officially declared itself the world's first totally atheist state in 1967.
And they were literally executing citizens just for privately owning a Bible.
Over in East Germany, the authorities realized that simply banning religion created martyrs, so they got creative.
What did they do?
They invented the Jugendweihe. It was a mandatory, secular, socialist coming-of-age ceremony meticulously designed to mimic and entirely replace Christian confirmation. Yeah, they literally hollowed out the religious structure and filled it with state worship.
But sheer military force and scientific atheism inevitably leave a spiritual vacuum.
Right.
And according to the chronological sequence of Revelation 13, that vacuum wasn't filled by another massive, sprawling empire.
It wasn't.
No, it was filled by a tiny, seemingly insignificant state that learned to exploit the very language of the religion it was replacing.
Which brings us to the second half of chapter 13, the introduction of the earth beast.
Exactly.
The text describes a creature that has 2 horns like a lamb but speaks like a dragon. And Bright Morning Star correlates this earth beast to the founding of North Korea and its first dictator, Kim Il-sung.
Yeah. The author unpacks the symbolism of the lamb first.
Okay.
In biblical iconography, the lamb is universally understood as a symbol of gentleness, sacrifice, and specifically Jesus Christ.
Right.
The exegesis argues that this points directly to Kim Il-sung's deeply ingrained yet frequently overlooked Christian roots.
Wait, really? His Christian roots?
Yes. Before the Korean War, the capital city of Pyongyang wasn't a communist stronghold at all. It was actually the epicenter of Asian Christianity.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah, it was so heavily populated with believers that missionaries commonly referred to it as the Jerusalem of the East.
And Kim Il-sung's family wasn't just like vaguely adjacent to this culture, they were deeply embedded in it.
Oh, completely.
His grandfather was a highly prominent Protestant pastor. Both of his parents served as active church elders.
Right.
In fact, the source points out a really fascinating historical detail regarding his mother.
Oh, the name translation.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Her given name was Kang Pansok. The name Pansok was literally given to her by a local pastor because it's the Korean translation for the biblical name Peter, meaning the rock.
That's amazing.
So Kim Il-sung grew up attending church, singing Christian hymns, and absorbing the theology of the Lamb.
Yet the biblical text explicitly says that despite looking like a lamb, this beast speaks like a dragon.
So why the disconnect?
Well, the author traces this to Kim Il-sung's formative years. To escape Japanese occupation, his family fled, and Kim grew up exiled in Manchuria, China.
Ah, China.
Right. There he learned to speak fluent Chinese, which, based on the author's earlier decoding of chapter 12, is the literal tongue of the dragon.
Wow.
He formally joined the Chinese Communist Party. He fought in the Northeast Anti-Japanese United Army alongside Chinese commanders.
Okay, so while his earliest cultural foundation was the church, his entire ideological, political, and military vocabulary was actively shaped by the dragon.
Exactly.
It's an incredible deception when you think about it. I mean, this isn't an outside foreign conqueror kicking down the doors of the church to burn it to the ground.
No, 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 no.
It's more like a charismatic youth pastor, someone
Yeah.
who grew up in the pews, who knows all the hymns by heart, who understands the inside language and the emotional triggers of the congregation.
I love that analogy.
And he uses that inherent trust to slowly lock the congregation inside the building, eventually warping the theology until the entire thing transforms into a totalitarian personality cult centered exclusively on himself.
That is exactly how it operated.
Sure.
But, maintaining a personality cult of that magnitude requires constant sustenance.
Right.
North Korea, this newly minted Earth beast, didn't possess the massive industrial machinery, the sprawling geography, or the endless natural resources of the Soviet Union.
No, they were tiny in comparison.
So how does a mathematically impoverished regime keep its people perpetually in line and legitimize its absolute rule?
It has to manufacture its own apocalyptic miracles and enforce a doctrine of total ideological purity.
Exactly.
And the scripture predicts this perfectly. It says the earth beast deceives the inhabitants of the earth by performing great signs, specifically making fire come down from heaven.
Right.
Bright Morning Star translates this imagery directly into the North Korean ballistic missile program.
Which is wild.
It really is. It's highly visible, technological theater designed to awe a captive domestic audience and terrify the outside world.
And the source provides a granular tracking of how this missile program evolved, which is just a wild historical ride.
Tell me about it.
In the 1960s, North Korea started with basic unguided FROG rockets provided by the Soviets. But they quickly realized they needed indigenous capabilities to truly project power.
But logically, how does that even happen? Like, how does a heavily sanctioned, isolated nation that routinely struggles with catastrophic famines manage to build an intercontinental ballistic missile program?
It seems impossible, right?
Yeah. Where did the seed technology even come from if the Soviets eventually decided to cut off their access to advanced weaponry?
Well, the author highlights a bizarre and fascinating historical loophole.
Okay.
During the Yom Kippur War in 1973, North Korean fighter pilots secretly flew combat missions in support of Egypt against Israel.
Wait, really? North Koreans in Egypt?
Yes. And as a gesture of gratitude, in the late 1970s, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat covertly gifted North Korea a small handful of Soviet-made Scud-B missiles.
Oh my gosh.
The North Koreans took those few missiles, relentlessly reverse-engineered every single component, and used that knowledge to kick off their entire domestic program.
That is just incredible.
Hmm.
From those gifted Egyptian Scuds, they eventually developed the Taepodong-1, which sent shockwaves across the globe when it flew over Japan in 1998.
Exactly.
And that straight line of development leads directly to today's Hwasong-15 ICBMs and advanced solid fuel technology. That is the literal fire from heaven.
It truly is.
But the Earth Beast doesn't just awe its citizens with spectacles in the sky. It physically and ideologically brands them, which brings us to the infamous Mark of the Beast, placed on the right hand or the forehead.
Right, and the author decodes this mark, not as a physical microchip or a tattoo, but as systemic ideological brainwashing. Specifically, it correlates to the imposition of juche, the North Korean state ideology, which roughly translates to profound self-reliance.
Right, is your...
But Juche didn't just remain a political philosophy, it was elevated into a mandatory, all-encompassing religion that dictated every thought and action.
And the source explains exactly why Juche had to be created to replace orthodox Marxism-Leninism by the 1980s.
Yes.
Traditional Marxism is strictly materialist and fundamentally rejects the idea of a royal bloodline or a monarchy.
Absolutely.
But Kim Il-sung wanted to pass the leadership of the country directly to his son, Kim Jong-il. To pull off a dynastic succession in a communist state, they had to rewrite the ideological software.
They had to.
So they introduced Zhu to elevate the supreme leader into the literal, life-giving father of the nation, requiring absolute religious devotion.
And once this Juche ideology is culturally implanted as the mark, the regime has to enforce it on a daily practical level.
Yep.
How do you guarantee that 25 million people exhibit absolute compliance? You tie their physical survival directly to their loyalty.
Because Revelation 13 states that no one can buy or sell unless they have the mark, the name of the beast, or the number of its name. 666.
Exactly.
When you look at the mechanics of the North Korean economy, it aligns flawlessly. The economy isn't a free market. It is a total state-run monopoly controlled by the party elite and the military.
Right.
At the top of this food chain is Room 39, the highly secretive government organization tasked with maintaining the supreme leader's slush fund.
Yeah.
If you are not actively participating in and demonstrating loyalty to this state-sanctioned system, you are cut out of the public distribution system. You cannot legally thrive. You literally cannot buy or sell to survive.
It's a perfect mechanism of control.
Yeah.
But it is the author's linguistic decoding of the number 666 where this exegesis reaches its absolute climax.
Okay, lay it on me.
For centuries, scholars have tried to make six fit various Roman emperors using numerology.
Right, like Nero.
Exactly. But Bright Morning Star looks at how the number is used elsewhere in the Old Testament. In the Book of Kings, 666 is specifically used to measure the weight of gold, the character for which is Jin, which translates directly to the Korean surname Kim.
That is wild.
It is. But wait, the author goes further.
Okay.
In the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, the number 6 is used in a very specific genealogical registry to count the number of a man's descendants.
Descendants. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you synthesize those two specific biblical applications of the number gold and descendants, the puzzle pieces just snap together.
Right.
666 translates to the descendants of gold, which is the exact definition of the Kim dynasty.
Precisely. It is an astonishing piece of linguistic and textual pattern recognition.
It really is.
Under this interpretation, the number isn't a barcode on someone's wrist. It is a dynastic title.
You know, the ultimate irony of this entire historical timeline just hit me.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Well, we started this deep dive looking at the sea beast, the Soviet Union, under Khrushchev, launching aggressive campaigns of scientific atheism, literally shuttering churches and threatening parents to eradicate the very concept of religion.
Right.
But the ultimate end state of these fiercely secular, radically atheist regimes, culminating in the Earth Beast of North Korea, was to perfectly recreate the exact religious structures they initially tried to destroy.
Wow. Yeah.
They built a system complete with infallible, godlike leaders, sacred foundational texts in the form of Juche, and apocalyptic miracles in the form of ICBMs.
It is a profound historical observation. When you step back and look at the breathtaking scope of Bright Morning Star's document, it truly is an unparalleled intellectual exercise.
It's just nuts.
From the blood-soaked demographic collapse of World War II, the Soviet Union's miraculous geopolitical recovery, to the ideological engineering of Khrushchev, all the way to the reverse-engineered missile silos of North Korea. The mapping of Revelation 12 and 13 to modern history is seamless in its internal logic.
It is, and it brings us right back to where we started, that high-definition X-ray of human nature.
Exactly.
Regardless of whether you view this document as a literal divine prophecy or just as an incredibly clever retrospective historical overlay, it forces us to ask a deeply unsettling question.
Right.
Why is it that when humanity attempts to permanently kill off the concept of God in the pursuit of pure logic, or in the name of ultimate state power, we never actually end up with a utopia of pure logic?
We really don't.
No. We always inevitably end up instantly building new, far more terrifying gods in our own image.
Yeah.
Something for you to mull over.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.